de mi familia, de la comunidad y la humanidad es importante. Vacúnense.
When I got vaccinated for a different reason than I'm telling you to get vaccinated for. I got vaccinated in December because I was terrified I would get sick and I would get my father or my wife or one of my patients sick. In May, I'm telling you, vaccinate so we can get back to normal life. We all want to get to barbecues and parties and to travel. If we go back to regular life without vaccines, we're guaranteed to get COVID. These vaccines are amazingly safe. COVID is not. So get vaccinated so we can start the best summer ever.
Called to order at 9:03. Roll call.
Supervisor McGorty,
Here.
Supervisor Mulhern,
Here.
Supervisor Hashak,
Here.
Supervisor Jurdy,
Here.
and Chair Williams.
Here. And I've asked CEO Antle to lead us in the pledge this morning. This will be her first public meeting as interim CEO.
Join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
We're on to agenda item number 2, public expression.
There is no public expression.
Okay. Next, I'm going to swear in Darcy Antle as interim chief executive officer, interim clerk of the board, interim risk manager, interim OES director, and interim water agency director. A lot of hats. Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States.
I will vow true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States.
I take this obligation freely, without mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Obligation freely, without mental reservation or purpose evasion.
Well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
I will well and duly faithfully
Congratulations, CEO Antle.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 3, consent calendar. Has proper notice been established?
Proper notice has been established.
Do supervisors have any items to pull for comment or separate consideration? Do we have public comment on the consent calendar?
There is no public comment.
Can I invite a motion?
I move approval of the consent calendar, and it appears as though Supervisor McGorty is no longer in the meeting, so I just wanted to make sure the clerk of the board knew that.
We will work on getting it back.
I think let's go ahead and vote.
Supervisor Mulhern,
Yes.
Supervisor Jurdy,
Yes, I'll vote yes on the consent calendar.
Supervisor Hashak,
Yes.
Supervisor McGorty,
Yes.
and Chair Williams.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Item 4A. This is regarding legislative subpoenas returning, and it'll be introduced by County Council and Behavioral Health Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christian Curtis, County Council. So this, the board had previously authorized the subpoena of a few of the principals of the Ordner Management Group. As the board is aware, we have a somewhat unusual situation in that the state is significantly behind in conducting its Medicare Medi-Cal audits and the services that have been provided. So they are now auditing the years for which Ordner Management Group was the ASO for the county, and in reviewing the records, one of the things that the state would normally look for is not just the records of the report that had been filled out, but rather the records of the businesses that had generated the basis for those reports. Unfortunately, OMG has since dissolved, and we have been having trouble locating some of the records of that company. As such, the board authorized the issuance of a legislative subpoena for several of the principals of the Ordner Management Group. And they have provided some of the relevant documentation, we're now hoping to have the opportunity, if the chair will allow me, to go ahead and to question those witnesses and hopefully find some more information as to the specific records of the businesses that will be needed in response to the audit.
Are there any board questions regarding the process before we begin? Okay, not seeing any. County council, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I may suggest, I think that we have Mr. Signorati on the line as well as Ms. Lance. I think we could start with the questions of Ms. Lance. Mind I request that the clerk of the board swear her in?
Ms. Lance, if you could please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony that you shall give in this issue or matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Ms. Lance. I'm not certain if you were, I know sometimes as people are coming into the meeting from the waiting room, they lose a little bit of the audio, so I'm not certain if you got all of the background there. As I was touching on before, we're in a somewhat odd situation here in that the state is significantly behind in the course of its Medi-Cal audits, and one of the things that they typically look to in the course of the audit is not just the records of the cost reports that are submitted to the county, but rather the records of the businesses themselves. And as I understand it, Ordner Management Group LLC has since dissolved. So we're going to ask you some questions here today to try and find where some of those records might exist or where there might be sufficient documentation to be able to establish the information that we would need, sufficient evidence for the purposes of the state's audit to establish the legitimacy of various charges that have been established during that time. Now, as I understand it, this will be actually the first year for which the county had been operating under an ASO model. And we have not been through an audit from the state under the ASO model previously, but we do have some sense as to what the administrative services are, or what information the state has historically requested with respect to administrative services. So I'm going to be asking you a few questions related to those categories of information. But I want to start off with, first of all, Ms. Lance, are you able to hear and understand me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right. And when I refer to Ordner Management Group LLC, are you familiar with that particular entity?
Yes.
And was that a company that contracted with the County of Mendocino?
Yes.
And was that sometimes referred to as OMG?
Correct.
All right. And what was your position with OMG?
CFO.
And so I'm going to start. We had requested in connection with the subpoenas a variety of documents, and one that your attorney submitted was a copy of an organizational chart. Did you see the organizational chart that was submitted?
No, I'm sorry, I did not.
Okay. If we could have Ms. Scott share her screen, I think I just want to show it to you and make sure that you're able to see it. You may need to, oh, there we go. Are you able to see the chart that's on the screen right now?
Yeah, pretty well.
Okay. If you need to zoom in at all on any part of this, we can. If you need us to move it around, we can. Does this accurately reflect the structure between Ordner Management Group and its various providers? And please take your time if you need. Oh,
Sure. Yes, from my recollection, yes.
oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Lance. We seem to have lost our audio. If you would give us just a moment. And I see you were speaking there. If you could just repeat whatever it was that you had said previously.
I said yes, from my recollection.
We still seem to be having some trouble.
County Council Christian Curtis, I have audio of Ms. Lance.
If we could test, maybe another supervisor could try speaking just to see where the audio issue might lie.
I can hear her as well. This is Supervisor McGorty.
Me too.
So my apologies to everyone. We seem to be having some technical difficulties in the chamber. Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Jurdy, could you please try talking again?
Okay, this is Supervisor Jurdy, and just to let you know, I was not hearing audio for the last maybe 30 seconds.
Okay, we can hear you now, and it appears to be working.
my apologies, everyone. We seem to have sorted that out, though. All right, Ms. Lance, if you could just restate whatever it was that you had been saying previously.
I said yes, based on my recollection.
Thank you. Now, one of the things that the state typically asks for is not just an organizational chart with respect to the different companies, but also an organizational chart that's internal to the particular entity. In this case, to the best of your knowledge, was there an org chart that had been generated by Ortner Management Group for its own management structure?
It's been many years since I worked for OMG, so I do not recall.
And you said that your own position was CFO. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you name any of the other officers of OMG?
Well, you have Thomas Ortner on the phone. He was the CEO.
And who else?
Let's see. It was, I don't remember their exact titles, so forgive me for that. But there was Mark Montgomery. There was Todd Harris that worked there. There was, I'm trying to think, Connie Drago. That's all I can remember working for the Mendocino OMG project.
Now, when you say the Mendocino OMG project, did OMG have any clients other than Mendocino?
Yes.
Okay, and who were those clients?
It was a group of facilities that worked with the adult mentally ill.
And just bear with me. Sometimes my note taking is a little bit slow. So I'll just ask if you be patient as we go along here. One thing I do want to clarify as I'm asking these questions, please, I'm going to be asking about some things that you may have some personal knowledge about, but it's been a long time since that you've addressed. If you're not certain on an answer, that's okay. I still want to make sure that we get the best of your recollection, because we may be using this to sort of figure out what other avenues we may be able to explore. However, if there's something that you just don't know, I don't want you to guess. So if there's something that you didn't have any personal knowledge of, please don't speculate. If there is something that you had some personal knowledge of, but you maybe don't know the exact specifics. For example, if I were to ask you an amount that was billed on a particular contract, you might know roughly the range, but you may not know the specific amount. It's okay to go ahead and provide an estimate to the best of your recollection. You understand?
Yes.
And as we go along here, just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to try not to speak over you, and just if you could try and wait to make sure that you've waited for me to finish. I sometimes trail my questions a little bit, so my apologies on that, but it'll help with the clarity of our record if you wait for me to finish. All right. So far you've listed Thomas Ortner, yourself, and just so I have it, your name is currently Melissa Lance. Is that correct?
Correct.
Was there another name that you used during the time that you were working under Ortner Management Group?
Melissa Calicott.
Any other names?
Not during that time.
Okay. And in terms of the employees that were working under or OMG, uh, were there individual employees who were assigned to any sort of quality assurance function, or chart review, or other sorts of functions along those lines?
Not that I recall.
Is there a place that you could look to find that information?
No, I do not have any records for OMG.
Now, is there anyone else that you know of that might have records for OMG?
You could try to ask Thomas Ortner.
Anyone else that might have them?
Not that I know of.
Now, did OMG have any? Oh, sorry, let me back up. You said that you were the CFO. Were you an employee of OMG?
No,
Okay. Did OMG have any employees?
a few.
Okay. And did OMG submit any payroll or other tax records with respect to those employees?
Yes, they did.
Okay. And do you know if anyone retained a copy of any of those records?
I do not know.
And did OMG keep a copy of the licenses of any of the professionals performing any quality assurance or other functions?
I would not know that either.
Now, as the CFO, who did you report to?
Thomas
You-
Ortner?
And did anyone report to you?
I had some accounting clerks that reported to me, but they didn't work for the Mendocino project.
Now, one thing I do want to make sure that I clarify, you referred to the Mendocino project, and is that, I'm specifically asking questions with respect to the Ortner Management Group LLC. And in some cases, I know that providers may form different corporate structures for different types of projects. When you refer to the Mendocino project, is that all of the work that OMG was doing, or did OMG itself, that corporate entity, contract with the others as well?
That's correct. It's the latter. It's the Ortner Management Group contracted with Mendocino County and also contracted with other providers.
Now, who within OMG had the authority to sign contracts?
That would be Thomas Ortner.
And was he the only person that had the authority to sign contracts?
Yes.
Was there any particular process for review of contracts as they came through?
Not that I can recall.
Did you yourself see the various contracts that came through?
I had seen them, yes.
And let me back up a little bit. You said that Mr. Ortner had the authority to sign contracts. Did he need any sort of approval from the other members, or was he able to do that on his own?
I believe he was able to do that on his own.
Now, in terms of the process of reporting the contracts to the county, did you ever personally transmit copies of contracts to the county?
No, I did not.
Do you know who did?
Thomas Ortner.
Were you involved at all in the contracting process?
No,
Now, Ms. Lance, as I understand it, you were, sorry, let me back up. So your attorney has submitted various copies of various cost reports that include a number of state forms, as I understand it, including the MH 1960. Have you reviewed those?
Not in many years.
Okay. Are you familiar with the form MH 1960?
I'm not quite sure. That I understand. I'm familiar with the cost report, but not the individual schedules.
Okay. Um, and did you have any role in preparing the cost reports?
Yes,
And what was your role?
I prepared them.
And were those prepared on an annual basis?
Yes.
And one of the things that the state is going to want in the course of its audit is not just the cost reports itself, but rather the documents that went into generating the cost report. And one of the things that we've asked for in particular is a copy of the general ledger or journal of OMG. Did OMG keep? Actually, let me back up. If when I use the term general ledger, does that have a particular meaning to you?
Yes.
Okay. And just so we understand each other, what is a general ledger?
It is all the transactions of the company during the year.
All right. And did OMG keep a general ledger?
I left in 2018. It had one at that point. I'm not sure what happened after that.
And how was that general ledger kept?
See, I know that we had to close down the accounting system, so it wasn't electronic anymore. So it may have been printed, but I don't recall.
Okay. You said it wasn't electronic anymore. Had it been electronic at one point?
Yes,
Okay. And what was the format that it was in?
QuickBooks.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Sure, QuickBooks.
Okay. And was that through a cloud-based program, or was that installed locally on a individual hard drive?
I believe it was the online version of QuickBooks.
And you said you closed that down at some point. Do you recall when that was?
I don't know exactly, but for sure it was in 2018 when we ceased business.
To the best of your knowledge, does QuickBooks keep a copy of the data once you've closed out your account?
I have no idea.
Who had access to that QuickBooks account?
Me.
Anyone else?
I believe Thomas Ortner did as well, had access, but I can't be for sure.
And um, the QuickBooks account, was there any? Sorry, let me back up. Was that in the entirety of your time that OMG was operating? Is that the only way that the general ledger was kept?
Yes.
And I may have touched on this before, but I want to make sure that I understand. Have you ever attempted to reactivate an old QuickBooks account to obtain old data?
No.
Have you attempted to reach out to QuickBooks in this case to get access to the data?
No.
Do you still have any password or other information that you might need to verify that you may have an entitlement to the data?
No.
Was there a particular email account that was associated with the QuickBooks access?
I don't recall.
Do you recall what email address you were using for the Ortner Management Group at that time?
I think it was my first initial last name at the OMG. It could have been Melissa Calicott or M. Calicott or M. Lance. I don't recall.
Okay. When did you change your name?
It was 2015, 2016 officially, I think.
And did you what? I want to make sure I got that name correct. Did you say at OMG?
At the OMG.
The OMG?
Yes.
So THEOMG, and then is there a dot something after that?
Yes. .us. I think.
Do you still have access to that email account?
No.
Okay. How was that? Strike that. Um, did OMG operate its own email server, or did you sign up with some sort of web-based email server?
I have no idea.
Do you know who would know?
We could try to ask Tom Ortner.
Is there anyone else that might know?
The company doesn't exist, so I don't know who to ask.
Was there anyone in particular who provided IT services to the company during that time?
I believe it's Adam Ortner.
Sorry, did you say Adam Ortner?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And was he an employee or officer of OMG?
Neither.
Was he under contract?
I don't know what that means. Oh, you mean like a contracted employee?
Correct, like an independent contractor.
No.
Was there a chief technological officer or other person within the company responsible for its IT or IS services?
No.
Now, you said that the ledger might have been as a printout. Do you recall printing it out or otherwise preserving the records at the time that the QuickBooks account was closed down?
I don't recall.
Would you have any regular practice that you might use at that time?
I have never closed down a company before. That was the first time.
Was there any reporting or record keeping that had to be done in association with closing down the company?
I turned all the records were turned over to Thomas Ortner in 2018.
Thank you, but that's not quite what I was asking. Is
Sure.
as part of the closeout, whether for tax purposes, for reporting to the Secretary of State, or maybe in accounting to the members, or any other purpose, was there any sort of accounting or review that had to happen at that time?
We did have to have close the books, if that's what you're asking. Yes, we did close the books, and I believe tax returns were filed, and I didn't work for the company anymore after that.
Okay. Was the general ledger used or consulted in closing the books?
In what way?
Um, do you recall if it was referenced or otherwise relied upon in closing down the books?
I guess I don't understand the question. The general ledger, I guess, is sort of the books in my world.
Um, and I guess what I'm looking for here is if there's any way where there might have been a copy or otherwise had that information generated or used. And part of my questions are going to be aimed not just at sort of figuring out where the information might be, but hopefully to jog your own memory as well, as
Sure.
this has been quite some time. And what I'm asking here is really, was there anything in the closeout process that involved the creation of a copy, the printing, the downloading, or anything along those lines that would have created a copy or some portion thereof of the general ledger?
If there was, it would have been provided to Thomas Ortner for that as I had left.
Okay, but do you have any specific recollection of any such copies?
I don't have a recollection.
How were the cost reports generated?
The cost reports were in Excel, if that's what you mean.
Uh, Sort of. I see that we have these Excel spreadsheets that have the various categories broken down. And for example, on the MH 1960, there's a breakdown of the cost of the company by various factors. I believe one is land, one might be buildings, other sorts of expenses. You said that you were the one who prepared those reports, is that correct? Where
Correct.
did the data come from? How did you come up with those numbers when putting them into the cost reports?
Which cost report are you referring to?
Specifically, the ones for OMG and in particular the MH 1960s.
I don't recall preparing a cost report for OMG. I did prepare the cost reports for all the sub-providers.
Did anyone prepare a cost report for OMG?
The only one I could think of would be Gary Ernst, who was the contractor that I was told to work with on doing cost reports. But I don't know for sure.
And sorry, how do you spell his name?
Gary, I think it's Ernst is E-R, let's see, E-R-N-S-T, I think it was.
And you said he was a contractor, is that correct?
He was on the county side, and I was told to work with him. He was my guide, my instructor on how to provide cost reports.
Do, do you recall anyone at OMG preparing a cost report for OMG itself?
No,
Were you ever asked to create a cost report for OMG?
I don't remember, but I don't think so.
In terms of generating the cost reports for the various providers, where did that data come from?
A lot of it came from the vendors themselves would provide that data, and then I would put it on the cost report.
Now, when you say they would provide that data, were they providing you sort of the specific numbers to put in the specific cells of the spreadsheet, or would they provide you something that you would then have to, do some calculations to come up with what would go on the form?
I believe the expenditures came directly from them, the costs that get reported on the cost report. They would provide me that data, and then I feel like the units of service, they would provide it, and I'd probably double check it against my records to be able to put that on the cost report.
And how did they transmit this information to you?
I believe it was by email.
And was that to your own email address, or was there a company email address that was used for this purpose?
A company email address.
And sorry, let me clarify. What I mean is, was it that the email address that you referenced earlier that would be, you said M. Lance or M. Calicott. Is that where they would send that information?
Yes.
Was there any other sort of generic email address, for example, accounts receivable at OMG or the OMG or anything along those lines?
No.
Was there anyone else that they might have emailed that information to at OMG?
No.
To the best of your knowledge, is there anyone in the county they might have emailed that information to?
I wouldn't know.
Do you recall seeing anyone CC'd from the county in any of those emails at any time?
That came from the supervisors to me?
Correct.
I don't recall.
Do you recall forwarding that information to anyone at the county?
Not in that format. I just in the final format of a cost report.
Now, I want to go back a little bit to the general ledger and just where some of that information might be kept. Is there any place in which there was a duplicate of the transactions that may have happened at the time they went into the general ledger? For example, was there a process by which that information would be received and saved someplace before it was updated into QuickBooks?
No.
And you have a background in accounting, is that correct?
Correct?
And do you hold a CPA or other license?
Yes.
And if you were to try and, say, recreate the general ledger, what sources of information might you look for? What sources might be available?
Invoices and receipts?
Now, to the best of your knowledge, where did OMG store its invoices and receipts?
Paper files?
So was it the routine practice of OMG to keep them just in paper files?
Yes.
To the best of your knowledge, did OMG ever undertake to digitize those records?
No.
And do you understand what I mean by digitization?
I do.
If I use any term that you don't understand at any point on this, please clarify, or if I ask a question you don't understand, please let me know and I will rephrase in a way that will be clearer.
Sure.
Do you know what happened to those paper files after the company dissolved?
I believe Tom Ortner had all files as the company closed and I left.
Now, is there anyone else that might have a copy of those invoices and receipts?
No.
Now, what about the individual providers, vendors, et cetera? Would they have copies of the invoices and receipts that you might have received from them?
I can't say.
Is there any particular, say, bank account records or other source of information that might have the details that might partially reconstruct a general ledger?
All the documents went to Thomas Ortner upon the cessation of the company.
And part of what I'm looking for here is whether there might be other entities that might have kept copies of anything that was irrelevant. So we've talked a little bit about QuickBooks, and
Sorry, I'm at home. I'm sick, so I'm at home. I have a dog.
it's quite all right. It's something I think we've all become accustomed to in this Zoom world. So did were the finances of OMG kept in a particular bank account?
Yes,
Okay, and was it just one bank or were there multiple banks?
one bank,
Okay, and which bank was that?
River Valley Community Bank, I think it was.
And the funds in that account were they only for the OMG?
Yes,
So if I want to make sure I have this right, if the bank had kept records of the transactions from that account, would those partially reconstruct some of the information from the general ledger?
I would say only partially.
Okay, and what would be missing?
Well, there wouldn't be actual invoices and actual receipts. There would only be bank statements, and that's not enough to create a general ledger.
Is there any information that would appear on there that would not appear on the general ledger?
No,
Okay. So in other words, and I'd asked this a little bit before, but just to be clear, there's no reason that any transaction on the bank statement would be for some other purpose. There was no commingling of the corporation's funds with those of some other entity. Is that correct?
no commingling between entities, absolutely not.
And to the best of your recollection, was there just one account at the Bank River Valley Community Bank, or were there multiple accounts?
I believe there was one.
Now, did OMG file tax documents?
What type of tax documents?
So, for example, did OMG file tax returns with the IRS or the FTB?
Yes,
And would some of the information on those documents be reflective of what is in the general ledger?
yes,
Did OMG file records with respect to payroll taxes?
yes,
And did OMG pay for workers' comp insurance?
yes,
Would those records reflect the employees that OMG had at the relevant times?
yes,
Are there any other documents that you can think of that may have been filed with any other entity that may have reflected who the employees were of OMG at any particular time?
no,
Now, I'd asked about documents that might have been filed with the IRS or the FTB. Were there any other financial documents that may have been filed with any other entities? For example, anything relating to local taxes, anything related to corporate taxes, et cetera?
not that I can recall, no.
Now, um, OMG had a particular rate that it would charge for services. Is that correct?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you recall the process by which the rates in OMG's contract would be set?
Is that the contract between OMG and the county or the contract between OMG and its sub-providers?
Thank you for clarifying. The contract between OMG and the county.
I don't recall.
Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions related to some terms that are used in the course of the audits. So I may want to just make sure you're clear and you understand the nature of the terms. Are you familiar with the term relative value for service?
No,
Are you now? You said that you had prepared the cost reports. Are you aware of the process for generating the information that goes into the cost report?
preparing the sub-providers cost reports, yes.
So do you know how they arrived at the numbers that they provided to you?
The revenue or the expenses?
Uh, let's start with the expenses.
Okay. I believe the expenses are usually from their profit and loss statements.
And do you know how those are broken down relative to the various clients of the subcontractors?
I don't recall.
Okay. Um, in terms of the costs per unit of service that may be generated for the cost reports, do you know how that calculation was reached?
For certain sub-providers, I know that there was a contracted rate between OMG and the sub-providers. So they may have, for example, a daily rate. And so that was pretty easy.
And are you familiar with the rule in Medi-Cal billing that limits recovery to the lower of either the contracted rate or the actual cost?
No, I've never done Medi-Cal billing.
So you wouldn't be familiar with Chapter 15 of the um, CMS manual?
I've never done Medi-Cal billing. So
Okay. Was there anyone within OMG that had prepared financial records for the purposes of Medi-Cal compliance?
no,
Was there anyone OMG contracted with for that purpose?
no, nobody that OMG contracted with. We were provided Gary Ernst from the county to assist with the preparation of the cost reports.
Anyone else from the county?
I feel like he was the main one. I kind of remember having a training provided by the county for me and the children's side, and it was Manny Orozco. I remember being at that meeting and speaking, as well as Gary Ernst.
And I'm sorry, could you say that the last part again?
Manny Orozco and Gary Ernst were the ones providing the meeting and the instruction at the meeting on cost reports.
Do you know how to spell? I want to get that first name correct. Do you know how to spell it?
Manny, Manny. I don't remember how to spell his last name, but it's OR something, Orozco. I don't recall. He was in the fiscal department at the county.
All right, I'm going to go back to contracts a little bit. As the CFO, did you have any role in reviewing accounts payable or checks that would be issued?
Yes,
Okay, and what was that role?
to review any bills that came in and pay them.
And so were you the one that would determine whether or not a check would go out when an invoice is received?
Yes,
Did you yourself issue the checks?
yes.
What was the process that OMG used to determine whether an invoice that was received exceeded the maximum amount on the existing contract?
Right. Yeah, we would have a spreadsheet on contract maxes, I believe, to be able to review that piece of information.
And if an invoice did exceed the contract maximum, what was your process at that point?
Well, I don't recall. It's been too long. I don't know if that ever happened.
Do you recall any process for initiating any sort of contract amendment to increase the cap on any of the contracts with the sub-providers?
I don't recall. I didn't negotiate the contracts. That was Tom Ortner.
Um, did you have any responsibility for notifying Tom Ortner or anyone else if a contract was nearing its cap?
Yes,
Okay, and do you did you in fact do that on occasion?
I don't recall.
How would you be informed if a contract maximum had been raised?
It's been so many years, I do not recall.
Do you recall on any occasion where you were notified that a contract was amount was raised?
I don't remember.
So I'm going to ask about a few specifics, and please let me know if you recall if this does jog your memory as to any details. I may ask you for some further information. Do you recall any point in fiscal year 13 or 14 or 14 15 recognizing that ICMS had been near its contract maximum or had exceeded its contract maximum?
I do not recall.
Did you have a regular process? Let me back up. Um, Was there a regular process of checking the spreadsheet before a payment would go out to ensure that the payment wasn't in excess of the contract maximum?
I believe so, but I don't remember the specifics.
Now, do you recall in fiscal year 14-15 or 15-16 a contract with WGCC or Manzanita being at or near its contract maximum?
I do not recall.
And what about Canyon Manor in fiscal year 15-16?
I've never heard of that company.
And who would, oh, sorry. Um, and just to be clear, WGCC is Willow Glen Care Center. Do you recall them ever being near or over their contract maximum?
I don't recall whether they were over their contracts or near it.
And who would be responsible for negotiating a contract increase if and when it was needed?
Tom Warner.
Do you know where copies of contracts or amendments were stored within OMG?
Tom Warner had them.
Do you know if they were digital or in paper?
I do recall paper.
Now, do you know if they were only paper, if they were, or do you just remember that they were paper?
I only remember the paper.
Was there any way in which you might be notified when a contract amount had been increased? Would you receive an email or other sort of information?
I believe I would have been notified, but I don't remember how that would have happened. If it was email or paper, I don't recall.
Do you recall if any of the contracts or contract amendments might have been scanned at any point? Do you recall seeing any of them in your email or being sent by through other people's email?
Not that I recall.
If they were, is there someone in particular who would be most likely to have had them in their email account?
Tom Warner.
Mr. Chair, if I might suggest this may be a good time for a 10-minute break.
Okay, we're on break for 10 minutes. Be back at 10:10.
Los latinos componemos el 25% de los habitantes del condado. Aún así, la mitad de los casos del COVID somos nosotros. Nuestra comunidad depende mucho de la población hispana. Desafortunadamente, no recibimos la protección necesaria, así que es importante que nos cuidemos uno al otro. De este modo, no perderemos a nuestros seres queridos y podremos disfrutar de nuestras reuniones familiares.
We are our ancestors' children, and we carry their intergenerational traumas attached to trusting the government and vaccinations. I can say I lived through a pandemic by choosing to get vaccinated. I chose to get vaccinated because I had to be a good leader and example for my people. I also got vaccinated to protect my daughter, who has a compromised immune system. I urge you to get vaccinated to become a protector of our elders and Native community.
Cuando contraté el COVID me espanté, pero cuando admitieron a mi papá al hospital con la infección de COVID me espanté aún más. Por eso me vacuné, para protegerme a mí y a mi familia.
Please, County Counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lance, I've got just a few more areas of some questions. First is, did you review the subpoena that you had received in this instance?
Yes,
And did you review the list of the category of documents that were on that subpoena?
yes,
And have you conducted a search to find any records that you might have in your possession that would be responsive to those categories?
yes, but I have no OMG documents.
Okay. Is there anything in the questions that I have asked today that has jogged your memory as to anywhere else that you might look for those materials?
No,
Okay. Is there anywhere that you haven't looked for those materials that you could look now at this time?
no,
Is there anyone other than you or Mr. Ortner that may have any of those materials?
no, except on the county side.
And when you say on the county side, just want to make sure that we're looking in all of the right places on our side as well. So, who on the county side would those materials have been transmitted to?
I have to go off my memory. Obviously, Gary Ernst being a big one related to anything cost reports.
Mhm.
I dealt with Todd Storty. I dealt with Doug Gherkin. I dealt with, I think I said mentioned Manuel Orozco early on. Tom
And sorry,
Penizzato.
sorry, could you say that one again?
Sure, that Manny Orozco was early on in the earlier years. And then Tom Penizzato. That's all I really recall off the top of my head.
And the second name you listed was Todd something, was that right?
Oh, yes. Todd Storty, I think, was there towards the end of our contract.
And can you spell that name?
Ooh. I think it was Storti. Storty. He was on the fiscal side.
Anyone else that you recall dealing with on the county?
Well, I definitely dealt with Venus, but that was more on the billing side, the monthly billing.
And what was Venus's last name?
Hagen or Hogan.
All right, so I have Gary Ernst, Todd Storty, Doug Gherkin, Manny Orozco, Tom Penizzato, and Venus Hogan. Anyone else?
There was a Mary Alice, but I apologize, I can't remember her name. I think it started Wilford. Mary Alice Williford is coming to mind as somebody in the fiscal side as well.
Anyone else?
That's all I can recall.
All right. Anyone else on the county side that anyone other than you at OMG would have transmitted any of this information to?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Not the financial stuff.
And what was the means by which information was transmitted?
Sure. It was either by email or by paper and hand delivered. I also used especially if there was client data information that was not HIPAA compliant, I would burn things onto a CD and have it shipped overnighted. I did that quite often too.
You said paper was hand delivered, was that correct?
Yeah, if I was going to be in the county or if Tom Ortner was going, had meetings, things would be hand delivered.
Okay. And when physical media, by which I mean either the CD, paper, or some other sort of physical device, was transmitted to the county, was it received by anyone other than those people that you named up above?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. So Were all of the billings through the HHSA agency? You wouldn't have gone through, say, the auditor or the executive office or anything else? Is that correct?
I believe you're correct. Yeah. It was just those people I remembered.
Now, are you an officer of the Willow Glen Care Center?
Yes.
And I believe I had mentioned Willow Glen as one of the entities that we were looking for contract documents on. Does Willow Glen maintain its copies of its contracts for any particular period of time?
Yes, it does maintain copies. I'm not sure of the amount of time.
Is there a possibility that Willow Glen might have copies of the contracts between Willow Glen and OMG?
It's possible.
And again, just bear with me. I can be a little slow on the note taking. Is there any person or place in particular those contracts would be stored if Willow Glen had a copy?
Let's see, there is a contract person in charge of contracts, but the executive director is probably the best way to go with that.
And who is the executive director?
Jeffrey Payne.
And what is the address of Willow Glen's principal place of business?
1547 Plumas Court, Yuba City, 95991.
Are there any other entities? Correct that. Let me go back just to the list of companies here. So ICMS, are you familiar with that company?
Yes.
And do you know what is its full name?
Integrated Care Management Systems.
And do you have any role at Integrated Care Management Systems?
Not currently, no.
Did you previously?
Yes.
And what was your role?
CFO.
When did you leave?
I believe the company wound up business in 2018, maybe early, actually maybe 2016. It's been a while, so I don't remember the exact date.
So ICMS is not currently doing business, is that correct?
Correct.
Who was the, strike that, what sort of organization was ICMS? What was its corporate organization?
Nonprofit.
LLC?
Nonprofit.
Nonprofit? And was there an executive director or other head of the organization?
Yes.
And who was that?
Jeffrey Payne.
Do you know anything about how ICMS might have stored its contracts?
I don't recall.
When ICMS wound up business, do you know where copies of its contracts had been kept or who might have ended up with them?
I would expect the executive director would have the documents.
Anyone else that might have them?
I don't think so.
Now, Manzanita, are you familiar with that company?
Yes.
Do you have any role in Manzanita?
No,
Is Manzanita still in business?
I have no idea.
Do you know who their chief executive or executive director might have been?
I can see her face. I'm sure Tom Wartner may remember. I don't remember her name.
All right, what about Canyon Manor?
I don't think I've heard of that company. Does it go by a different name?
It was a board and care company, if that jogs your memory.
No, I don't recognize the name of that company.
Okay, and what about, I believe it might be Creekside Behavioral Health? Are you familiar with that company?
Yes.
Do you have any role at that company?
No,
And to the best of your knowledge, is that company still operating?
I have no idea.
Crestwood, are you familiar with that company?
Yes.
Do you have any role there?
No,
And do you know if they're still operating?
I have no idea.
California Psychiatric Transitions, are you familiar with that company?
Yes.
Do you have any role there?
No,
Do you know if they're still operating?
no, I have no idea.
Now, what about the Mendocino County Hospitality Center? Do you know that company?
Yes.
Do you have any role with that company?
No,
And do you know if they're still operating?
I don't know.
Vista Pacific, are you familiar with that company?
Yes.
And did you have any role with that company?
No,
Do you know if they're still operating?
I don't know.
And this is a rather unwieldy acronym here, but McCavin, MCAVHN, are you familiar with that company?
Yes.
Did you have any role with that company?
No,
And do you know if they're still in business?
I don't know.
All right. Were you a member of the Ortner Management Group LLC?
Yes.
And do you recall who the other members were?
Yes.
Who were they?
Tom Ortner, myself, Adam Ortner, Mark Montgomery, Connie Drago, Jessica Riley, Todd Harris, Jeff Payne, Arnie Heisen. I think that's it.
I'm sorry, you went a little bit fast for me. What were the last two?
Jeff Payne, Arnie Heisen.
Do you recall if the composition of the members changed at any time during the life of the company?
Yes.
Okay. Um, are these, to the best of your recollection, are these the people who are members at any time during that period, or are you thinking of the members during one specific time?
I just forgot a member. I forgot there's one more, David Gilbert.
Okay.
There were two members that came on later in the life of OMG that were added.
And which ones were those?
That was David Gilbert, probably why I forgot, and Todd Harris were, I don't remember what date, but I know that they were added later.
Did anyone cease to be a member before the company dissolved?
Oh, actually, yes. Carrie Bevilacqua, don't ask me to spell that one. She was a member originally and then did leave the company.
Now, do you know where each of these people are now?
Not everybody, no.
Okay. And let me back up. Adam Ordner, is that the same Adam Ordner that you said provided tech support?
Yes,
Do you know his current place of business?
yes.
Um, I don't think I want to ask you for any residential addresses during open session here, but I may ask if your attorney would stipulate to providing address information in a more confidential manner so that we don't advertise anyone's home address. Is that agreeable, Mr. Zignorati?
Yeah, after the deposition, I'll email you any contact information that we have that you request.
Okay. And I guess what I am going to ask is if you just attest that that is the best of the information they have, so we're not losing any benefit of the subpoena. Is that agreeable?
Agreeable.
All right, Mr. Chair, I believe I'm done questioning this witness. I don't know if any members of the board had any follow-up questions they wanted to ask.
Do any supervisors have questions? Supervisor Jurdy?
Yeah. Hi, Miss Lance. I don't know that we ever met. I'm the only supervisor who was on the Board of Supervisors when the Ortner Management Group was hired by the board in 2013 to provide oversight of adult mental health services in Mendocino County. And I'm just going to ask, I don't know if you're aware, because you were an officer in the company, but one of the principal reasons that the county of Mendocino, this predates my joining the board in 2013, was looking at contracting out for adult services and for children's services, was that in prior years, the county, in running those departments, offering those services, some of which was contracted out, had decided that there were, or had painfully undertaken audits by the state, and the state found millions of dollars in audit exceptions, and so there was not proper documentation of the services that had been provided by either county employees or by contracted providers. And so one of the principal reasons the county was interested in contracting out this oversight service, in this case, it was Ortner for the adult and Redwood Quality Management for children's services, was to provide greater quality assurance in that billing, to make sure that the billing and the county's billing to the state, I believe, is almost entirely Medi-Cal eligible billing. And so I was really surprised to hear earlier in your testimony that you, as the chief financial officer of the company, and your team, I don't know if it was 2-3 people, but your team, however big it was, you stated did not have expertise in Medi-Cal billing, but were in fact relying on information provided to you by 1 or 2 county employees. Again, one of the principal reasons for contracting out to Ortner was to have greater assurance that the billing submitted to the state was in conformance with the state standards, proper documentation, and that we would not experience audit exceptions. So is there anything you'd like to elaborate upon in your testimony on that point? Were there other people working for Ortner that were in fact guaranteeing that the billing provided to the state was not going to be subject to a negative audit exception?
I'm going to just make a quick objection for the record that it misstates her testimony and it's argumentative. But Melissa, go ahead and answer the best you can.
Sure. So what I understood is that I was to report all of the billing to the county fiscal clerks. And I did that in the format that they requested, accurate and complete. And then they took that information and they billed Medi-Cal directly, the county fiscal people, not OMG. We provided all the details and in the billing format that they requested, and they billed Medi-Cal. So we had no control over what they billed.
I may have a few questions. Ms. Lance, what was your first date at OMG as CFO? Roughly?
2011, I believe.
Until when?
2018 when it ceased.
In that entire period of time, is QuickBooks Online the only accounting software utilized to store records?
Yes, I believe so.
And when would you have last accessed it?
2018.
And would that have been from an OMG-owned computer or your personal computer?
OMG computer.
Did you ever access it from a personal computer?
Yes, it was an online QuickBooks service.
I see. And what operating system was the OMG-owned computer? Was that a Windows or a Macintosh?
Mac.
And your personal computer?
Mac.
Would either of those computers have cloud backup services?
I don't know.
Were you ever prompted to initiate a backup, or did you ever see notice that a backup was in progress or complete?
No.
At OMG, was it a best practice to back up computers?
I don't know.
As CFO, were you ever aware of any financial transactions involving paying a vendor for backup services?
I don't remember specifically. I do remember paying an IT service.
And what company was paid for IT service?
I don't recall the name.
Was there a company known as Glitch Media paid for IT services?
I've never heard of that company.
Was Adam Ortner ever paid for IT services?
I don't recall.
Did you file or did you prepare tax returns for Ortner?
Yes.
And you signed those tax returns?
I did.
Is it common practice to archive the records that would be needed for an audit?
Yes, and all the records went to Tom Ortner.
When you say they went to Tom Ortner, was that both paper form and digital?
Yes.
I imagine the digital records may be too large to email. How would those have been transmitted? Was a service a cloud-based storage solution used to transmit the records?
The tax returns or the accounting information?
The accounting records that would be necessary during an audit of the tax returns.
I believe that they were in paper format, as I mentioned before.
So you printed them?
Well, the invoices and the receipts are all in paper format, is what I recall.
Was the QuickBooks data ever exported?
Not that I recall.
You never exported data?
Not that I recall, but it would have been on the computer I no longer have.
Did you generate reports?
Yes.
And would those reports have been transmitted to any government agency other than Mendocino County?
No.
Who at OMG would have worked with IT personnel outside of OMG?
Tom Ortner, possibly.
Is there anyone besides Tom Ortner?
Adam Ortner.
If you needed to determine which companies had been paid to archive digital information, where would you look for that data today?
I don't have any access to the OMG data at this point, and I can't recall who we paid.
Do you have any records in your possession?
No.
And
record.
have you had any access to records since you left Ortner in 2018?
No.
I have no further. Do any other supervisors have questions? Seeing none. County Council, are you done?
Yes, Mr. Chair. If we could move on to Mr. Ortner, and if I could ask if the clerk could have him sworn.
Please.
Mr. Ortner, if you could raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony that you shall give in this issue or matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Curtis, before you begin, is Ms. Lance free to go?
Yes, I can believe we can release her this time if the chair is okay with that.
Yes.
Thank you. So Melissa, you can log off if you need.
All right. Now, Mr. Ortner, you've been here during Ms. Lance's testimony. Is that correct?
I missed probably 5 minutes of that as I was dropped several times and had to re-log in.
Okay. So I'm going to start with where she had left off, which relates to the members of the Ortner Management Group, LLC. And did you hear the list that she had provided?
I did?
Okay. Were there any names that she left off that list?
No.
And Mr. Signorati, can we stipulate with Mr. Ortner as well that the information will be transmitted, or the contact information will be transmitted with an attestation separately from this proceeding?
Yes.
And I want to ask you a little bit about the management structure within OMG. Now, to the best of your recollection, did OMG ever generate an org chart or some other visual representation of its management structure?
We were pretty small. Other than perhaps something on a 8.5 by 11 sheet that was handwritten, then the answer is no.
And so I'm going to run through some questions to try and sort of recreate that now, if we can. So were you the managing member of the LLC?
I was.
And were there any other managers of the LLC?
There were not.
Okay. Who were the other officers of the LLC?
There were none.
Now, we had heard that Ms. Lance was the CFO. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, did anyone else have a similar sort of title?
No.
Did any of the members do work for the LLC?
All of them did.
Okay. And why don't we run through them sort of one at a time and get a little bit of information as to the nature of the work that they did and the reporting structure. So give me just a moment here. Now, you just testified that you were the managing member. Did you, other than your sort of executive functions, did you perform any sort of either clinical work, any or quality assurance work, any work that would require any sort of professional license under California law?
No.
Okay, so you did not undertake any sort of chart review or anything along those lines. Is that correct?
I do not.
And as I said with Ms. Lance, please bear with me. My note taking can be a little bit slow. Now, Melissa Lance, she had testified that her title was CFO. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did she have any title other than CFO?
No.
Did she perform any sort of clinical or quality assurance type of work within OMG?
No.
Did she perform any functions other than that of the CFO?
She did not.
Now, were either you or Ms. Lance an employee of Ortner at any time?
Never.
And did you want to make sure that I asked this correctly? Were you under contract at any point? Were you compensated purely as members of the LLC, or were you otherwise paid for your work?
I'm not exactly sure of the question here. I certainly was paid as a member.
Okay, but and I guess part of what I'm asking for is, other than being a member, were you separately paid under contract for any services or work that you had provided for OMG?
Hmm. I'm still not sure of your question as it relates to a contract. I was never under contract, no.
Okay, so you were never under contract with OMG, is that right?
Correct.
And what I'm getting at here is that sometimes there are structures where someone may be both an owner of a company, but also may be paid a salary or otherwise compensated for their work in a different manner. So the money that you were paid was only as a member of the LLC, is that correct?
That's not correct. I was paid for specific projects routinely, as I
Oh,
believe it was called a guaranteed income. I think
okay.
that's a tax term. I don't remember.
Now, you said that you were paid for specific projects, but you were not an employee, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you didn't execute a contract, is that correct?
That's correct.
So how was the guaranteed income memorialized?
I determined what it was as the principal owner.
And thank you, but that's not quite what I was getting at. So how was that documented? Where, when that decision was made, how would that be reflected on paper?
I don't believe it was.
So how did you inform the other members what your guaranteed income would be?
I did not.
Was it reflected in the general ledger?
Yes.
Was there any sort of tax reporting on that, say a 1099, payroll taxes, et cetera?
Not a tax person, so I'm not sure how that was handled.
Okay. Do you recall, did you receive a W-2 for your work
I
for
did not.
OMG?
I did not get a W-2.
Okay.
K-1, perhaps.
All right. And how was the, well, let me go through these one at a time. How was Ms. Lance compensated?
In the same fashion.
Was there some distinction between, say, distribution of the profits among the members of the LLC versus payment for services rendered?
Yes.
Okay. And were what were the terms that you would use to refer to those?
Distributions versus guaranteed income.
How was the guaranteed income of the other members set?
In the same fashion.
Um, Meaning that you yourself simply picked a number?
That's correct.
Did you discuss that with the individual members before you decided on what number they would receive?
I was the managing executive and determined that on my own.
Okay, but did you negotiate with that with them individually?
Yes.
And was that memorialized anywhere?
In the same fashion, it might have been in the, or I'm sure it was in the financial records.
Was there ever a separate employment contract or other sort of agreement reflecting that?
No.
So let's move down the list. Adam Ortner, did he have any sort of particular title within OMG?
He did.
What title was that?
He was in our intake department. So a director of access.
Or did you say Director of Access?
Access, correct.
Did he hold any other titles?
He did not.
And how was he compensated?
In the same fashion.
Did he ever do any IT or technical support work for the company?
Informally.
Was there anyone who did tech support formally for the company?
No.
Now, I believe Ms. Lance had referred briefly to there possibly being a contract for some sort of IS services. Do you recall at any time during OMG's operation, did it contract for any sort of IT services or technical support?
We did not, as far as I can recall.
And so what were the functions that Adam Ortner would perform as the Director of Access?
Took referrals by phone to determine proper assessment and service for patients or clients.
And who did he report to?
Our medical director,
And who is the medical director?
Dr. John Riley.
And who did who did Dr. Riley report to?
I'm not a clinician, but he did report to me as the executive of the LLC.
So if I were drawing an org chart, it would go from you to Dr. John Riley to Adam Ortner. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
All right. Is there anyone else, or strike that? Did anyone report to Adam Ortner?
Yes.
And who was that?
He had two staff members. I can't remember their names.
Now, was it the same two staff members throughout the entirety of OMG's existence?
I believe so, yes.
And what were their job titles?
I believe it was just access.
Did they have any sort of professional certification, or was there any sort of professional certification required for that job?
They were both nurses.
Do you recall what type of nurse?
LPT, LVN.
And what was the nature of the work that they performed?
The same as I described for the director. So it was to take phone calls that were referrals, to do preliminary assessments, and to review that information with the medical director to determine appropriate level of care.
And did OMG keep copies of their licenses or license numbers?
Yes.
Now, do you know if those copies still exist?
I do know that they do not exist.
And you said that, excuse me. You said that you do not recall the names of those two employees. Is there any record that you could consult that would reflect the names of those employees?
No, not anymore.
Now, were they on contract or were they employees?
They were employees.
So To the best of your recollection, did OMG pay payroll taxes for those employees?
Yes.
Okay. And so if we were to, say, have a list of the employees, so correct that. If we were able to, say, obtain a list of the names of the employees that worked for OMG, whether from tax records, workers' comp records, et cetera, would you be able to recognize the names of these two particular employees?
Yes,
Okay.
probably.
And did anyone work? Now you had said that these two positions reported to Adam Ortner. Was there anyone underneath those positions? Did anyone report to them?
No.
So, and did either one of those report to the other?
No.
So if I were drawing the org chart, I would show two nurse positions reporting to Adam Ortner, reporting to Dr. John Riley, then reporting to you. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. So moving on, Mark Montgomery, what was his position?
Trying to remember the exact position. Operational vice president.
And who did he report to?
He reported to me.
And did anyone report to him?
No, he had no staff.
And what were his functions?
He was to be the on-site in Mendocino County manager of the operations with Mendocino County, the contract with Mendocino County.
And I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but you're talking about the work that was done for Mendocino County. Did OMG, that is Ortner Management Group LLC, have clients other than Mendocino County?
In terms of other management contracts, yes.
Okay. So if I were to say try to figure out the costs for the services provided to Mendocino County, I would in looking at the general ledger need to distinguish between cost for Mendocino versus cost versus other clients. Is that correct?
That's correct. Records were kept separately.
When you say records were kept separately, which records are we referring to?
In QuickBooks, it was departmentalized so that everything that related to the contract with Mendocino was separate from all other activities of OMG.
Now, is there a particular way, assuming for a moment that we get access to QuickBooks, is there a particular way that that was reflected in the QuickBooks records?
I'm sure it was entitled Mendocino County.
And is that a feature? Let me back up. I'm not especially familiar with QuickBooks. Is there a particular title of the feature by which they're segregated, or was it treated as though they were entirely separate QuickBooks accounts?
I'm not familiar with QuickBooks either, so I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question.
And if you don't know, I don't want you to guess. So, please just be candid on that.
I don't know.
Okay. All right. So going back to Mr. Montgomery, did he do any clinical work or any quality assurance work?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And what was the nature of that work?
Supervision of operational staff that were performing that specific function and all other clinical functions.
And did he have a particular professional license?
He did.
And what was that?
He was a PhD in psychology.
And now, I think you just told me his degree. Did he have a particular license or certification
Yes,
from the state?
clinical psychologist.
Okay. Any other licenses or certifications?
Not that I know of.
And what other, excuse me, you had said that he did supervision on site. Did that involve any sort of chart review or review of patient information?
Yes,
And you said that he had no staff. Was that correct?
that's correct.
So when you say that he supervised, is he supervising subcontractors?
He is supervising subcontractors and other staff within the OMG operation. Not a direct reporting relationship, but a supervision.
And could you explain to me just a little bit what you mean by that distinction between supervision versus direct reporting?
All the other operatives reported to me directly. And as an oversight, I had a regional manager to oversee their work independent of my supervision.
So would he then report to you as to what their job performance was, et cetera?
Yes.
All right. Now let's go to, I believe it's Arnie Heisen next. Did you recognize that name?
Yes, I do.
And did Mr. Heisen have any particular function within OMG?
Yes, he did.
And just so I'm getting the titles right, I said Mr. I don't. Was he a doctor or hold a position that would require the title doctor?
No, no
Okay.
license.
And what was Mr. Heisen's position?
He was the administrator of North Valley Behavioral Health.
And what was North Valley Behavioral Health?
A psychiatric health facility.
Now, was that part of OMG?
It was not.
But he was a member of OMG. Is that correct?
That's correct. We provided management services to that particular entity as a
Okay.
separate contract.
So, and sorry, I want to make sure that I'm following correctly. You said that you provided management services to North Valley Behavioral Health. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that was under a contract between OMG and North Valley Behavioral Health?
That's correct.
Was any of the work that Mr. Heisen did pursuant to or would be billed under the contract between OMG and the County of Mendocino?
It did the first year, but not after that.
Okay. And that first year, he was working as the administrator of North Valley Behavioral Health. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Was he also an officer or of North Valley Behavioral Health?
He was not.
And I think that you stated this before, but I want to be clear. Did Mr. Heisen have any professional licenses?
He did not.
So did he perform any sort of clinical work or any quality assurance?
No.
And how was he compensated?
He was compensated in the same fashion as the others that I previously mentioned.
Okay, and I think I might have skipped that question with or Dr. Montgomery. How was he compensated?
The same fashion.
Uh, Now, did anyone report, strike that, who did Arnie Heisen report to?
He reported to me.
Did anyone report to Arnie Heisen?
The entire staff of the psychiatric health facility reported to him.
You say the entire staff of the psychiatric health facility, is that the North Valley Behavioral Health?
Yes, correct.
Okay, but were those employees of OMG?
No,
Okay. Did any employees or contractors of OMG report to Arnie Heisen?
no,
So if I were drawing an org chart for OMG, I wouldn't be listing anyone underneath Mr. Heisen. Is that correct?
that's correct.
All right. And then Connie Drago, or is it Drago? I'm not sure how you pronounce that name.
Strago,
And is it Ms. Drago or Dr. Drago?
is,
All right. And did Ms. Drago perform any work for OMG?
yes,
And did she hold a particular position or title?
Director of Quality Assurance.
And as Director of Quality Assurance, did she perform any clinical or quality assurance work?
Yes,
And what was the nature of that work?
working with the county to do all chart reviews, perform all quality functions as determined by the county, and to file the reports as were required for the contract that we had with the county.
And did she hold any professional licenses related to that work?
She's an RN.
And is that the only license that she held?
Yes,
And did who did Ms. Drago report to?
she reported to me.
And did anyone report to Ms. Drago?
No,
And how was she compensated?
in the same fashion as the others.
And then I believe the next one I have on the list here is Todd Harris. Do I have that name correct?
That's correct.
And is it Mr. Harris or Dr. Harris?
It's Dr. Harris, but his license is MFT.
Okay. And did Dr. Harris do any work for OMG?
He did.
And did he hold a particular title or position?
Program director.
And as program director, did Dr. Harris do any clinical or quality assurance work?
Yes, he did.
And I believe you said that he was an MFT. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did he hold any other professional licenses?
No,
Who did Dr. Harris report to?
he reported to me.
And did anyone report to Dr. Harris?
No,
And how was he compensated?
in the same fashion as every other member.
All right. Now, Jeff Payne, do I have that name correct?
That's correct.
And is it Mr. Payne or Dr. Payne?
Mister,
And did Mr. Payne do any work for OMG?
Yes.
And do you have any position or title within OMG?
He was the executive director of Willow Glen Care Center and the executive director of ICMS.
Now, are Willow Glen Care Center and ICMS part of OMG?
They are not.
Did he hold a particular title for OMG?
No.
And was he compensated for his work for Willow Glen Care Center and ICMS through OMG or separately by those organizations?
Through OMG, as we were the managing agency for those two organizations.
Okay, so did you have a contract between OMG and those organizations?
Yes.
And how was he compensated?
In the same fashion as other members.
And did he do that work for the entirety of the time that OMG was operating?
No.
Okay, what were the dates in which he did that work?
Well, ICMS only operated in Mendocino County and started there and ended there. The dates, I think, might have been 2014 to 2016. For Willow Glen, he was there the entire time.
And who did Mr. Payne report to?
He reports to me.
And did anyone report to Mr. Payne?
The entire staff of the organizations reported to him.
Okay, did anyone within OMG report to Mr. Payne?
No.
And then is it Ani Heisen?
Arnie
Do I have that
Heisen.
name right? Sorry?
Arnie Heisen, we talked about him a few minutes ago.
Okay. And then David Gilbert, do I have that name correct?
Yes.
And is it Mr. Gilbert or Dr. Gilbert?
Mr. Gilbert.
And did David Gilbert do work for OMG?
Yes.
And did he have any particular title?
Operations officer for Willow Glen.
Any other titles?
No.
And who did Mr. Gilbert report to?
Jeff Payne. So I must have misstated what I said earlier.
So yeah, I just want to clarify that. So Mr. Gilbert, let me back up. Before, when was Mr. Gilbert a member of OMG?
I think it was 2016.
So he joined after OMG had started. Is that correct?
Oh, yes.
And before that, was he working for Willow Glen?
He was.
Okay. So was there a period of time in which Mr. Payne supervised Mr. Gilbert while Mr. Gilbert was not a member or employee of OMG?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And was there also a time in which Mr. Payne supervised Mr. Gilbert in which Mr. Gilbert was a member or employee of OMG?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall when that date was?
It's, like I said, I think it was 2016 when he joined the organization.
Do you happen to recall if it was before or after the start of the 2016-2017 fiscal year?
It was before.
So he first started during the 2015-2016 fiscal year, is that correct?
That's the best of my recollection, yes.
Okay. And did anyone within OMG report to Mr. Gilbert?
No.
Did anyone in Willow Glen report to Mr. Gilbert?
Yes.
Okay. And as the operations officer, did Mr. Gilbert perform any clinical or quality assurance work?
I'm not sure the terms are appropriate for a residential care facility to say clinical work was done there or quality assurance. So I guess I have to answer it no.
Okay. And was there any work for which a professional license was required?
No,
To the best of your knowledge, does he hold any professional licenses?
it does not.
Just to back up, did Mr. Payne do any work that required any professional licenses?
No,
To the best of your knowledge, did he hold any professional licenses?
it does not.
Now, how was Mr. Gilbert compensated?
In the same
Strike that.
fashion.
During the time that he was working for OMG, how was Mr. Gilbert compensated?
During OMG's membership, he was compensated in the same manner as everyone else.
All right. So if I were drawing an org chart, it would go from David Gilbert to Jeff Payne to you. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
And are there any other branches on that org chart, or on that portion of the org chart?
Trying to think here. We did so much repetition here of things. I'm trying to remember if we left anybody out. I don't recall that we've left anybody out.
Okay. So Carrie Bevilacqua, is the next.
Babakwa.
Oh, sorry. Do I have that name right?
It's called Babakwa.
Bevilacqua. Do you know how to spell that?
Bevcqua.
And is it Ms. Bevilacqua or Dr. Bevilacqua?
Ms.
And was she a member of OMG?
For a period of time, yes.
Okay. When did she leave?
2014.
And during the time that she was, let's strike that. Do you recall whether that was the first or the second half of 2014?
I don't recall.
So there's a chance that might have extended into fiscal year 2014, 2015. Is that correct?
Maybe. I don't remember.
And during the time that she was with OMG, did Ms. Bevilacqua do any work for OMG?
She did.
And did she have a particular title or a position?
Community Relations Director.
And who did she report to?
She reported to me.
And did anyone report to her?
No.
During her work as community relations director, did she have any occasion to do any clinical or quality assurance work?
No,
Did she do any work that required any professional licenses?
no,
To your best of your knowledge, did she hold any professional licenses?
she did not.
And how was she compensated?
In the same manner as other members.
All right. And I want to make sure that I've got a complete list here. So for the members, I have Tom Ortner, Melissa Lance, Adam Ortner, Mark Montgomery, Arnie Heisen, Connie Drago, Todd Harris, Jeff Payne, David Gilbert, and Kerry Bavacqua. Anyone else?
I can't think that we're missing anybody.
Okay.
Okay, no, I don't remember. I think that's everybody.
All right. And that was, let me go back a little bit. Todd Harris, was he a member of OMG the entire time?
No,
When did he join?
he and David Gilbert joined at the same time, so it was sometime in 2016, I believe.
Other than Todd Harris, David Gilbert, and Kerry Bavacqua, did anyone join or leave OMG during its time of operations?
No,
And for each of those members that we have gone over, did they perform the work that was described for the entirety of the time that they were a member of OMG?
no. I'm sure
Oh,
that there are different assignments were made before and after the Mendocino contract.
sorry, you said there were different assignments that were made?
Yes, people had different assignments before the contract with Mendocino County.
Okay. Now, during the entirety of the time with the contract with Mendocino County, did each of those people perform those, those, strike that. Let me take this one at a time. Um, during the entire time of the Mendocino contract, were you the manager of OMG?
Correct.
And during that same period of time, was Melissa Lance the CFO?
Yes,
Okay, so there were no other CFOs, is that correct?
that's correct.
And during the entirety of that time, was Adam Ortner the director of access?
Yes,
And were there any other directors of access?
no,
And during that entire time, was Mark Montgomery the operational vice president?
yes,
And were there any other operational vice presidents?
no,
And during that entire time, was Arnie Heisen the administrator of North Valley Behavioral Health?
yes,
Okay. And were there any other administrators?
no,
And during that entire time, was Connie Drago the director of quality assurance?
yes,
And were there any other directors of quality assurance?
no,
And then Jeff Payne, during that entire time, was he the executive director of Willow Glen Care Center and ICMS?
yes,
Okay, but and I want to make sure that I've got some of these dates right. Was ICMS was only during a limited portion of the time that Mendocino was under contract with OMG. Is that right?
that's correct.
Okay, but was he the only executive director of ICMS?
Yes,
Okay, and the entire time that OMG was contracted with the county of Mendocino, he was the executive director of Willow Glen Care Center. Is that correct?
that's correct.
All right, and so I think I've asked you about each of the members. You had also mentioned another name in there that reported to you, which was Dr. Riley. Did I have that right?
John Riley, yes,
And John Riley was not a member of the LLC. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Was he an employee?
He was a contractor.
And he reported to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you said, was it Adam Ortner that reported to him?
He did report to him, yes.
Okay. And did anyone other than Adam Ortner report to John Riley?
In a formal sense, no, but in a total sense, everything that we did clinically ended up on John Riley's desk. So I'm not exactly sure how to answer that for you.
And so I guess that there's sort of a distinction to be made here between things that he may have input on versus people who are sort of direct reports to him.
Yeah, he was the final decision maker for all clinical issues and reviewed all clinical issues. Sort of an independent clinical arm from the administrative arm.
But other than Adam Ortner, were there any direct reports to John Riley?
There were not.
And other than the people that we have named here so far, did you have any direct reports?
You mean, did I report to John Riley?
Oh, no, I meant other than John Riley and the members of the LLC, did anyone report to you directly?
No.
So other than the positions we've discussed here, there were no other staff, employees, or I guess contract employees of OMG. Is that correct?
I think you asked two different things there. There were other employees of OMG that were in our business office that reported to Melissa. But they did not report to me.
Okay. And right. So other than the employees that reported to Melissa and the employees that we have otherwise described here, there were no other employees of OMG. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the employees reporting to Melissa had done no clinical or quality assurance work. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I'm going to defer to the chair here. I'm prepared to go on, but if the board or staff would like a break, this may be a good moment for it.
Do any supervisors need a break?
Can we take a quick break?
You'd like to take a break?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's come back at 11:35.
And Curtis, approximately how much longer do you think you're going to go?
It's a little bit difficult to say. I would guess maybe an hour.
Okay, thank you.
We are in the race of our lives.
For all of our lives.
Against COVID-19.
The virus keeps changing into new variants.
Which is what viruses tend to do when they spread.
Some variants are more contagious,
while others cause more disease and death.
If we do not stop the spread of COVID-19 soon,
some variants may develop that we do not have antiviral therapies for.
Some could make our vaccines less effective or not effective at all.
This would set us back to where we were last year.
When we were worried that our hospitals would be overwhelmed.
When schools closed and children had to shelter in place.
And when we could not see friends and family for fear of spreading COVID-19.
So it's so important that we take all necessary precautions to protect everyone.
Especially the most vulnerable among us.
We need to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible.
To save as many lives as we can.
Together, we can win this race.
For our patients.
For our elders. For ourselves. For you. For us.
For our community.
Por nuestra comunidad.
Yo me vacuné porque amo a mi familia y amo a mi comunidad.
Yo me vacuné para no exponer a personas vulnerables y no poner en riesgo las personas que amo.
Yo me vacuné. Mi vida es importante, mi salud es importante. La salud de mi hijo, de mi familia, de la comunidad y la humanidad es importante. Vacúnense.
When I got vaccinated for a different reason than I'm telling you to get vaccinated for. I got vaccinated in December because I was terrified I would get sick and I would get my father or my wife or one of my patients sick. In May, I'm telling you, vaccinate so we can get back to normal life. We all want to get to barbecues and parties and to travel. If we go back to regular life without vaccines, we're guaranteed to get COVID. These vaccines are amazingly safe. COVID is not. So get vaccinated so we can start the best summer ever.
And I'd just like to revise something I'd said there at the end. I think I'd estimated about an hour. Looking at my notes, I think it's going to be a bit longer than that. So it may be appropriate at some point here to go ahead and take a lunch break, give everyone a little bit of time to eat and come back. That being said, I'm ready to go ahead and proceed. We have Mr. Ortner.
Yes,
Oh,
I'm here.
I'm sorry. Your box moved on my screen, so I was looking in the wrong place. We talked a little bit about the org chart. Other than the changes that we had discussed in terms of the members leaving, were there any other changes to the org chart of OMG as it relates to the Mendocino County contract over the life of the Mendocino County contract?
No.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about, there were a few people that you weren't able to identify or you couldn't recall their names. I'm going to ask you just a few names to see if they may be some of the people that you were referring to. First of all, I have Sherry Johnson here.
That's one. Sherilyn, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And what position did she hold?
She was access.
Okay. And Sonia Fortikoff?
I do remember Sonia, yes.
And what position did she hold?
Access.
Okay. And was there a Jerry Moore?
I don't recall.
Okay. And what about Jessica Riley?
Oh, she was a member, yes. How did we skip her?
Oh, maybe I did. Okay. So Jessica Riley was a member of OMG. Was that for the entire time?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And Jessica Riley, what was, is it Ms. Riley or Dr. Riley?
Ms.
Okay. And what was Ms. Riley's position within OMG?
Director of Utilization Review.
And in that position, who did she report to?
She reported to me.
And did anyone report to her?
No.
Now, did she do any clinical or quality assurance work?
Yes.
And did she hold any professional licenses?
RN?
Any other professional licenses?
No.
And how was she compensated?
In the same manner?
And did she hold that position for the entirety of the time that OMG had the contract with Mendocino County?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to move on to some questions now. Actually, let me back up. Any other members that we might have skipped or missed?
Surprised we skipped that one, but no, there are no others.
All right. So I'm going to go back to some questions with respect to the financial records of OMG. And you'd said that you'd missed some of Ms. Lance's testimony. Was that correct?
That's right. About 5 minutes, I think.
Okay. Well, hopefully you got most of it then. So I had asked Ms. Lance about the general ledger, and did you hear that portion of the conversation?
I think so. I think I heard it all.
Okay.
I don't know
And
what it was, so.
And are you familiar with the general ledger for OMG?
Yes.
And in what format was that kept?
Could you ask it a different way? I'm not sure of your question.
Oh, certainly. What medium was that stored on?
For the duration of our operations, it was on QuickBooks.
And who had access to the QuickBooks account?
Melissa did, and I did, though I never used it.
And was there a particular email address or other account information associated with that QuickBooks account?
I'm not sure what the nature of the question is. You mean something connected to QuickBooks that was through an email?
Yeah. So, in other words, did QuickBooks use a particular email address for you when you would access it or when you signed up for it?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall what email address you were using at the time that you had the QuickBooks account?
I had so many. I can't remember. I'm sure it was similar to Melissa's. T. Ortner at the OMG.us, but I don't remember. I had many email addresses at that time for different purposes that used different formats of my name.
Now, when you say you had many different addresses, were there many different addresses for your work for OMG, or was there
No.
just that one?
No, it was just that one.
Okay, so you're a little bit fuzzy on the details, but the T. Ortner at the OMG.us, that would be the only one you would have used to conduct business for OMG. Is that correct?
I only had one, and if that was the first initial last name at the OMG.us, I think that was standard for all of us. But
Now,
I don't remember.
Do you recall how you got that email address?
Well, I set it up, yeah.
How did you set it up?
Gee. I don't remember.
Okay. Did OMG have its own email server, or did you use a cloud-based service?
We had I believe we had our own email server. Was internal.
And who managed that email server?
No one.
Who set it up?
Adam Ortner.
Do you know if there was any cloud backup for the email server?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Was there a strike that? Who registered the domain name?
Adam did.
And did you use any sort of web hosting or cloud-based service for anything related to the email server or the web pages of the company?
We had a database that was for client records. I don't remember the name of it. There were no physical information or anything on there other than client records.
Okay, and just to be clear, as I go along here, I'm the primary concern is going to be fiscal records. At no point will I be asking for any sort of specific patient information. And if I ever ask a question in a way that makes you think that you would need to provide patient information, just let me know and I will rephrase.
Understood.
Um, do you strike that? At any point, did you have a copy of the QuickBooks information? Was it ever exported to any sort of local format or some sort of format that you may have kept on a hard drive, CD, or other medium?
No.
When the account was closed, how was the information taken out of QuickBooks?
It was printed. I had a wad of paper.
Is that the only way that it was stored?
Yes.
And do you still have that printout?
No.
Were there any copies or anywhere that printout may have been scanned or transmitted, whether by fax or any other mechanism at some point?
No.
Uh, Other than Melissa, was there anyone who generated cost reports for OMG?
Other than Gary Ernst? No.
And sorry, you said that Gary Ernst had a role in generating cost reports. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We worked directly with the contractor for Mendocino County to perform those functions.
Do you recall at any point was an MH 1960 or similar form filled out for OMG?
I don't know what a 1960 is. Was an OMG cost report done? Only if Gary Ernst did that. We were not requested or required to do that.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of a cost report for OMG being done?
I don't know. As I recall, the work with Gary Ernst was backed up way beyond even the time that we were there. So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. If there had been such a cost report, how would it have been transmitted to the county?
I don't know because it would have been in Gary's hand.
Uh, how did Gary get the information related to cost reports?
He got it from Melissa?
Did you get it from anyone else?
No.
Were you ever CC'd or copied on any of the transmission of fiscal information to Gary Ernst?
Not that I recall.
Now, the information that made up the general ledger, in other words, the documents that it was based on, I think that we heard some testimony about there being receipts or invoices. How were those records kept?
I believe hard copies were filed.
Were there ever any digital copies?
I don't know the answer to that. Don't know.
Who would know?
Melissa?
Do you know what happened to any of the paper files of OMG after the company ceased operations?
I do. They were destroyed.
When were they destroyed?
Late 2020.
Were there any electronic copies or anything else that was maintained?
No.
Now, were there any? Now we had talked about the general ledger and the invoices. Now, what about the tax records? Were copies of those maintained?
Not sure what you mean by tax records.
Did OMG keeps copies of any filings that it had with the IRS, FTB, or other government agency?
I have nothing.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear.
Said I have nothing. No.
Do you know if OMG kept those records?
I am OMG.
Let me break it down a little bit differently. During the time that OMG was operating, did it keep copies when it would file those materials? In other words,
yes, of course, yes.
And were those kept purely internal, or were there any outside contractors? For example, did you contract with an accountant or a firm or any other service that might have retained a copy?
Well, we did everything internally.
Now, I think that you touched on this already, but when the company dissolved, were those part of the records that were provided to you?
Yes,
And were those part of those records that were destroyed?
that's correct.
Is there anywhere that you can think of that a copy of those records might exist?
Nothing in our possession, no.
Anywhere that you can think of that they might exist that's not in your possession?
Federal government, state government,
Anywhere else?
no.
And I'm going to run through some similar questions with respect to the payroll records. When we talked about the financial records before, did that include the records of any payroll, including payroll taxes, et cetera?
Yes,
And are you aware of any location that any of those documents might exist presently?
not aware of any place.
Was there any, other than QuickBooks, was there any sort of electronic or cloud service that was used with respect to payroll?
No.
If you were to attempt to reconstruct the records of the general ledger, what resources might you look to?
I wouldn't know where to begin. Accounting was not my background. If I were to begin something like that, I'd ask the county for their information.
Mr. Chair, we may be coming up on a natural stopping point, and I see we're near the noon hour. I do have more questions, but it may be a good time for the to take a lunch break.
Would you like to see if supervisors have questions before break?
Yes, I believe that would be prudent.
Do supervisors have any questions for Mr. Ortner?
I do, but I
Supervisor
think,
Jurdy?
well, I do, but I think I'd rather wait till County Council's finished his questions.
Any others?
Mr. Curtis, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're not sure how much time is left. Our strong preference, though, is to take a short break as opposed to a longer break for lunch, given that both Mr. Ortner and myself have appointments and meetings in the afternoon that we need to attend. So we're happy to move forward if you are.
I just want to make sure that we're not using sort of forcing any staff to say that may otherwise need to be having a break. Mr. Chair, I'm perfectly fine with a short break or continuing, whatever's going to work best logistically.
Let's continue for now.
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Ortner, I'm going to ask you some questions regarding the contracting process that OMG used. Who in OMG had the authority to sign contracts?
I did.
Did anyone else?
No.
And was there any particular review process that you went through prior to signing any contracts? For example, did it have to go through fiscal or legal review before it went to you?
Anything that was directly contracted with the county was reviewed by the county's protocol. Anything that OMG contracted with sub-providers, I did personally, and there was no other review.
And when you did that review, did you receive a copy electronically or did you receive a copy in paper format?
Are you talking about from the county or from the providers?
Let's start with from the providers.
It was hard copy.
Is it always hard copy?
Yes. We did drafts by electronic, but final copies were always hard copies.
And when you say drafts by electronic, would that be by email?
Yes.
And would the emails ever reflect, even if a final copy of the contract were not in the email, would the email ever reflect that the contract had been signed?
No.
So, in other words, there's no occasion on which you might have said, we signed and we're sending off to you or something along those lines?
I don't remember that. All I remember is that I required a hard copy with a wet signature so that I could put that into our file and also into the folders that were provided to the county on a routine basis.
And how were the subcontractors selected?
That's a tough one to answer because we had such a limited local selection. So for the most part, we used the closed services of those that I was familiar with, both directly involved with, and also that I knew within the region. And we put together a network of services that I think you saw on that org chart that was produced earlier. So essentially it was myself and other team members who made recommendations for providers. We interviewed them and selected them based on the interview.
And as part of that process, did they provide their form contracts or any draft contracts that they used?
No, I provided them with the contracts.
So did OMG use its own form for all of its subcontractors?
Correct.
And did that form contain a maximum or not to exceed amount?
It did include that, but that didn't mean that that was always to be relied upon based on patient needs or client needs.
When you say not to be relied upon, what do you mean? What was the process if there
Process
there
is
needed to be
that
more?
we had a contract with Mendocino County for a maximum amount not to exceed, which we never did. From there, it was up to us as the ASO, the Administrative Services Organization, to determine who the providers would be and what the amount would be typically in a contract. And if that needed to be adjusted based on needs determined clinically, we may have to adjust that at the end of the year. My
And what
job was to make sure that it never exceeded the contract amount that the county gave us.
And what was the process for adjusting at the end of the year?
It was based on looking at data of utilization, looking at what our current needs were, and what limited resources we had available to us as a contingency to extend a contract amendment to providers.
And in each of those cases, was a contract amendment signed?
In every case, by the way, I don't recall we ever did that, but I would have required a signature on an amendment, yes.
Okay, so you have no specific recollection of having done that. Is that correct?
I don't recall that we ever had to do that.
Was there any policy or practice that was set in place to address how that would be handled when it did happen?
Was there a written policy? No.
Were there any discussions as to what the practice would be for that?
It never happened that I recall, so it's one of those things that I think we would have dealt with that as it came up. But I don't recall that it ever came up.
So, as I understand it, there was a process for providing copies of the contracts to the county of Mendocino. Am I correct in that understanding?
Yes, it was done routinely.
Okay, and what was that process?
We had a 3-ring binder that either myself or Mark Montgomery personally delivered to the mental health director, laid it on their desk, and it was 100% complete of every provider that we were utilizing within our contract.
And 3-ring binder, does that mean that the documents were in paper format?
That's correct.
Were there ever scans or other copies that were transmitted?
No.
How were amendments handled?
Amendments with the county or with providers?
Oh, sorry, amendments with the providers. How would those be relayed to the county?
They would have been related in the same way, but as I said, I don't recall we ever did that.
Was there a separate schedule that was set up for, correct that? When were the 3-ring binders provided? Was that at the beginning of the year or the end of the year?
It would always be at the beginning of the year. Be right after we would have the contract with the county signed, we would then go out to our providers and update their contracts.
So what would happen if you, say, contracted with a new provider during after the start of a particular fiscal year?
Well, I would take a look at what resources we had available to us to determine modifications to current contracts or if we had any money in our contingency fund, which we always had a small amount for that very purpose, and a new contract would be extended, negotiations would occur, agreement accepted, contract written, signed, and then delivered to the county.
Okay, and how was that new contract delivered to the county?
Personally, just as the other ones were.
And would that be only paper?
No, I had a copy as well.
Oh, sorry. I meant was paper the only format in which it was transmitted to the county?
Yes.
Do you recall that ever happening?
Recall what happening?
Let me clarify. I had mentioned a process for contract amendment, and I think you had testified that you don't recall ever having gone through a contract amendment process. Do you ever recall an example in which you had to enter into a contract with a new provider after you had already provided the county with a three-reading binder of your subcontracts?
I know it occurred on one occasion where we were asked to add a provider in some Hispanic program. I don't remember which year it was, but it was a mid-year adjustment that we made. It was a small contract. We were able to accommodate that with our contingency fund, and it was done.
And do you have any specific recollection of how the contract was presented to the county?
In the same manner as I did others. That we had a signed contract. It was personally delivered to the mental health director. And that was the end of the process.
Do you recall who delivered it?
This particular one, I don't recall if it was me or if it was Mark Montgomery.
All right. Now, going to ask you, in fiscal year 13-14, do you recall executing any sort of contract amendment with ICMS?
No.
Do you recall ICMS exceeding their contracted amount?
No, I don't recall that.
Do you recall any discussion that ICMS might be about to exceed its contracted amount?
Not any more than I was with anybody else.
Now, correct that. Sorry, you said not any more than you were with anyone else. What does that mean?
We monitored contract amounts on a monthly basis to make sure that we were managing properly the resources given to us by the county. So every month we reviewed data, information on every contract to make sure that they were going to make it to the end of the year.
And do you recall ever having a contractor come close to that amount?
Yeah, many times.
And what happened when that occurred?
Conversations occurred between the management of that organization and myself, probably with Mark Montgomery as well, to make sure that contract maximums were going to be properly managed, or if necessary, clinically, that I was given enough notice to adjust what they were doing.
And when you say adjust what they were doing, what do you mean?
That I would have to, within our resources, find the amount of money that was necessary to take care of the clients or patients that were presenting themselves.
Meaning with that particular provider?
Yeah, with that provider, yes.
And did you ever have to do that?
I don't recall that we ever did. I'm sure we had conversations about it. I don't recall that that it ever got to that point.
Do you recall having any of those conversations with ICMS?
I'm sure I did. I'm sure I had conversations with every single provider about that every year.
But you don't recall any amendments, is that correct?
I don't recall any amendments, no.
Yeah, and I apologize. I might be somewhat repetitive in some of these questions, but I'm hoping that I might be able to jog your memory. When I bring up some of the specifics, part of the reason I repeat myself is that I'm hoping that you may have a little bit more recollection once we get into some of these details.
All right, I'll try. I'll try. Okay.
So with the Willow Glen, is it Willow Glen Care Center? Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Do you recall in fiscal year 14-15 or 15-16 engaging in any sort of amendment process or any discussions of possible amendments with Willow Glen Care Center?
Well, other than what I said previously about probably doing that with every contractor every year, I don't have a specific recollection about that, no.
Okay. And what about with Manzanita in those same years?
In the same year, ditto what I said before.
Now, when you have those conversations, who would you have those conversations with?
I would have those conversations with the executive director or CEO or otherwise the manager of that provider agency.
And is that done one-on-one or as a group setting?
Both. In certain instances, management of the providers would have other people present. Typically, on the OMG side, it was either me or Mark Montgomery or both of us.
And you said the conversation might have been you or Mark Montgomery, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there anyone in OMG who might have received information about a provider needing to go over other than you?
Melissa, who monitored that on a monthly basis. And she did that because of the data that was incoming on a routine basis, on patient days, units of service, that kind of thing.
Is there anyone other than you that would have been able to execute or might, even if they lacked authority, might have executed any sort of contract amendment or authorized an expenditure over a contract max?
No.
If someone had done that improperly, who would be in the position to have done that?
Ex-employee. No, no one.
Okay, so who would have was there anyone other than you that would have had direct contact or discussions about possible amendments?
Mark Montgomery could have participated in that, as I mentioned earlier, but he was not authorized to ever say that there would be additional resources or that resources would be adjusted in any way. He would have been a go-between us all. Other than that, it was me.
And do you recall any of the conversations about nearing contract maximums or needs to provide notice for an amendment or other sort of adjustment? Do you recall any of those conversations happening via email?
I don't recall that it did, but it probably did. That was a primary means of communication for us. I don't recall.
Were there any other forms of communication that would have had electronic records, for example, text message, anything else?
We didn't use that. I wore my ear out on the phone. That's where most of it occurred.
And if you did have the conversations via email, would it have been at that email address you provided earlier?
Yes.
Were there any other email addresses you might have used?
No.
Now, do you recall in fiscal year 13-14 contracting with Creekside?
Vaguely.
Do you recall if that occurred at the beginning of the year or if that might have been something that that occurred mid-year?
I don't remember when that occurred. Too many contractors, too many years.
And what about with Crestwood?
Crestwood was a primary provider for mental health rehabilitation services. So I'm sure we had contracts with them all 3 years we were there.
And is there any reason? So I've discussed, for example, the situation in which you might have contracted with someone after the start of a fiscal year. Is there any other reason that you can think of why a contract with a particular subcontractor would not have been provided to the county?
Gee, say that again. I'm not sure I got the last part there.
Oh, certainly. So, I've sort of singled out the scenario in which you might have contracted with a new provider partway through the year. Is there any other scenario in which the 3-ring binder that the county had might have omitted a particular subcontractor?
We might have added new players during the year. As I mentioned earlier, we did one with this Hispanic group. I don't remember what year. It's possible that there were one-time use contracts that were done because of existing providers not having the ability to perform. I'm sure that happened on a handful of cases with hospitalizations.
And what was the process for providing copies of those contracts to the county?
The same as before. We had a format for single-use hospitalizations. That's the only one I recall that we did that for. That would have been same process before, reviewed, agreed, signed, delivered to the county.
And would any of those ever be transmitted by email?
No,
Would copies ever be transmitted by email?
I don't believe they ever were.
Would there have been any sort of contemporaneous discussions that might have sort of reflected the fact that a contract had been entered into that might have been reflected in emails?
I'm sure there were conversations with the providers because some of them were distant that occurred by email. Final contracts, no.
What about, say, a conversation with the county? Something along the lines of, "Hey, we need to add a new contract," or we've just added a new contract. A paper copy will be coming." Anything along those lines?
I don't remember that we ever did that.
If you did that, who would have sent the emails?
I would have.
Anyone else?
No,
So Melissa or Mark, they wouldn't have sent them?
no. All contracts went through me.
And what about who on the county side would you have been corresponding with?
Tom Penizzato.
Now I notice, so you had discussed a situation where you might add a vendor sort of after the start of the year. Is there any reason that you would then not have that vendor on the contract list for the next year?
If we signed a single-use contract, they would not automatically be on the following year. That would be the only occasion that they would not.
Any? Do you recall doing any single-use contracts with Crestwood?
Crestwood has multiple facilities. There was never a contract with Crestwood Incorporated, if you will. They were all done with individual facilities. So I don't recall we ever had a single use contract with Crestwood. I just remember that we had regular use contracts with Crestwood.
So I think this might be an important point, so I want to make sure I'm getting this right. You're saying that the contract, correct that, Crestwood is some sort of, say, parent or blanket company, is that correct?
Yes,
And so there might be a contract in the name of an individual facility that may be different than Crestwood. Is that right?
It would be Crestwood of Sacramento or Crestwood of Reading or Crestwood of someplace else, yes.
And so we may see an invoice or record of a payment to Crestwood that may actually correspond to a different contract name. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of your question.
So part of what I want to understand is essentially if there may be a situation in which the name on an invoice or a name on some record of payment may be different than the name of the facility.
Gee, I don't think that would have ever occurred. I think it would have always been the name of the facility.
Is there any reason the name on the contract would be different than the name on the facility?
Crestwood was a common name among all of its facilities, but it was a Crestwood of the location.
And to the best of your recollection, were they different? Were the different locations different companies? Were they different entities that you had to contract with?
I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that we were required to have separate contracts by facility and not with the corporate office.
And when you say you were required, who required that?
Whoever the provider was.
So it was on the provider's side that requirement was coming from?
Correct.
Now, do you recall a contract with Mendocino Coast Hospitality Center in fiscal year 14-15?
Yes.
And if we're missing some of the language, specifically the payment terms of that contract, is there another document that might be reflected in somewhere?
I don't know where it would be.
Do you recall any discussions about terms of payment?
I don't remember specifics with them, although I can tell you, I'm sure we had conversations about specifics every year.
Was there a mechanism for when an invoice would come in for which you would determine whether or not the amount of the billing was matching the payment terms in the contract?
Sure, they were reviewed every month when they were submitted.
And would there be any documents or any records that might reflect what the payment structure was for MCHC? Was it per patient per day per unit? Whatever that structure might be.
It would have been in the contract, yes.
And if it wasn't in the contract, where else would we be able to find records of it?
Face me. Perhaps the provider has it. I do recall that the county had guidelines for that as well. And those were given to us by the county. So there might be a county record somewhere that has that as well. I can't help you with that.
Sorry, you say you recall guidelines, is that correct?
Yes.
And what sort of guidelines?
They were typically related to, I'm not sure what the document was called, but it was issued by the state of California for recommended cost per unit of service, cost per minute, cost per hour. And those were guidelines that we were required by the county to follow.
And you think that might have reflected the rates of payment for the individual providers? Is that right?
In some cases, yes.
And is there So I think if I understand you correctly, you're saying that essentially some of the contracts might have incorporated by reference or otherwise relied upon rates that were sent at a county or state level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And is there any particular language, or is there anything in the contract that may be sort of non-obvious that would indicate that the contract was relying on those rates?
They were specific that those rates were the rates.
Is there, I guess part of what I'm getting at is there a term of art? You know, is there some sort of phrase that I might not recognize if I were reading a contract that would refer to that type of structure or that type of rate?
There was no wiggle room whatsoever when we negotiated a rate with any provider. It was what it was. There was not a range. There was no exceptions to it. It was good for the year and to be reviewed each year and renegotiated each year. But for a 12-month period, it was in stone.
Sorry, did you say installment?
It was in stone.
Oh, in stone. Okay. And part of what I was looking for here is essentially there's something, and I don't know that I'm hearing it, but I just want to be clear whether there's a term, for example, sometimes there are terms in contracts that may use a Latin phrase or may use a phrase that's common in a particular industry that an outsider might not know what that means exactly. I guess what I'm getting at is there a particular phrase or particular language that might reflect this sort of contract structure?
It was called rate. It was very specific. If you looked at any contract, you would know exactly what each provider was billing. Whether it was an outpatient service, residential care service, an inpatient service, whatever it was, the rate was by day, by hour, by minute, and it was specific.
All right, I'm going to run through a few more of these and see if you have any sort of specific recollection. Do you have any recall of entering into a contract with Vista Pacific in fiscal year 15-16?
I don't have an answer for that.
Sorry, that was Alexa here. Sorry. Vista Pacific. I don't remember the name.
Any recollection of McCavan in 15-16?
Yes.
And do you recall if that one was at the beginning of the year or mid-year?
I'm sure it was for the entire year.
Any reason that might not be in the binder that the county received?
No, should be no reason.
Can you think of anywhere else that a copy of that contract might exist?
The provider might have it.
Now, what about my note is ICM, I think it's ICMS in fiscal year 15-16.
What's the question?
Do you recall entering into a contract with ICMS in fiscal year 15-16?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And was that for the full year or for part of the year?
I'm sure it was a full year.
Any reason that that would not be in the binder that the county received?
No.
Anywhere that you can think of that contract, that a copy of that contract might exist?
Again, I would say the provider might have that.
And am I remembering correctly that ICMS had dissolved?
That's correct.
Okay.
It was put into place to serve Mendocino County.
And did you have any role in ICMS?
None.
Who were the principals?
It was a nonprofit organization. The executive director was Jeff Payne.
And to the best of your knowledge, would anyone other than Jeff Payne potentially have a copy of the records of ICMS?
Not that I could think of, other than the county.
And I'm just going to run through a few more on the amendment side as well. I think you testified that you don't recall entering into any contract amendments with ICMS or Willow Glen. Do you recall entering into a contract amendment with Canyon Manor?
I don't even know who that is.
And I'm not certain if I asked about this one, but do you recall entering into a contract with or a contract amendment with Manzanita?
I don't recall that we ever did.
And was there any process for authorizing additional charges beyond just a formally executed contract amendment?
Not sure of your question. Can you state it again?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm looking for is if there may have been any sort of informal process by which an authorization might have existed to exceed a contract maximum that may be reflected somewhere. So, for example, if if there's an urgent need and there's some sort of emergency authorization of we'll pay you over the contract maximum and we'll process an amendment later. Was there any sort of process or procedure for that?
I don't recall that that ever occurred, and I would have never performed any kind of financial payment to anyone without having a signed document. As I said, we did have single-use contracts, so that's possible that those were used in certain instances. I only recall that that was done with inpatient.
Would there ever be a situation in which you might have a single-use contract for the same provider that you have on an annual contract?
Hmm. Hmm. I don't think so. I can't imagine how that would have occurred, but no.
Mr. Chair, if we could, this may be a good moment to take 5 minutes.
Okay, let's go on break and be back at 12:36.
Con la infección de COVID me espanté aún más. Por eso me vacuné, para protegerme a mí y a mi familia.
We are so lucky to live in Mendocino County.
The beauty of this place is reflected in the hearts of the people who live here.
We may not all look alike or sound alike,
but we are all one community.
During this pandemic,
we need to be kind to one another
and keep each other safe.
By being careful not to spread the virus.
And by getting vaccinated as soon as we can.
We need to do this for each other.
And we can do this together.
We can do this!
हम सब कर सकते हैं.
ये bet में आया.
我们能够做到.
Podemos hacerlo por todos nosotros. Hindi manandarki sadyam.
A gente pode fazer isso.
Yun robrum knia.
Wamanye mape.
Aba, kayang-kaya natin to.
Wir können das schaffen.
Namaste. આપણે કરી શકીએ છીએ.
Ehikino kako.
हामी यो गर्न सक्छौं. या ये all day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Ortner, of the questions that I've asked here today, is there anyone that would have better information than you or Ms. Lance?
No,
Would Adam Ortner have better information about the information services and what cloud backups or other functions might have been utilized?
I don't think so.
Anywhere that you can think of where any of this information might exist, anywhere that it may be possible to go to reconstruct either general ledger or other financial records of OMG.
No,
And I think Ms. Lance had previously testified that there was a bank account for OMG. Do you recall what bank OMG used?
River Valley Community Bank.
And was it only one? Strike that. Was that the only bank OMG used?
Yes,
And did it have more than one account or just one account?
OMG had one account.
And were the strike that? Were the funds of OMG commingled with any other funds in that account, or was that only for OMG's funds?
It was OMG only.
And have you reviewed the responses that your attorney provided to my office?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
What responses are you referring to?
I believe that there was a document that was provided that was entitled subpoena responses.
Oh, Tom, what he's referring to is a document that you prepared, summarizing the documents that were produced.
Got it. Yes.
Okay. Is everything in there true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Is there anywhere, have you reviewed the subpoena that you were served with?
Of course.
And have you reviewed the various categories of documents in there?
Yes.
Have you conducted a search for any of those categories of documents?
All of them, multiple times.
Is there anywhere that you haven't looked that you might look for any of those documents?
No.
Is there anyone other than you that may have a copy of some or all of those documents?
I have to give a qualified answer to say if they do, it's unauthorized. But I've asked everyone, and no one has any information.
When you say asked everyone, who do you mean?
The former members of OMG.
And in the questioning here today, have you thought of any place, or has your memory been jogged as to anywhere that any of those records might exist that you had not previously identified?
There is no other place.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I am done with the questioning at this point.
Questions from the board? Supervisor Jurdy.
Yeah, Mr. Ortner, do you recall that in 1996, when a majority of the board, myself included, voted to put the ASO contract out to bid for adult services? Do you recall that at that time, the ASO for the children's services had electronic billing in place with all their subcontractors?
No, I don't recall that.
Are you aware that it was required of your contract that you would have electronic billing set up for all of your subcontractors?
I am not aware of that. That was not true.
Given the fact that the county wanted electronic billing, and what we've heard today from your testimony is that all business conducted internally within your organization appear to be in paper document, why did you not turn over documents in paper form to the county if you lacked it in electronic format?
I'm not sure.
Hold on, Tom. I'm going to object. It misstates his testimony and it's argumentative, but you can answer, Tom.
Would you restate the question, please?
Given the fact that the county wanted electronic forms of documentation for patient records, for billing, et cetera, and what I've heard today from testimony from you and your chief financial officer is that you, your organization relied virtually entirely on paper documents. Why would the county at this point be still looking for documents in written form from your organization?
I don't know the answer to that.
To your knowledge, has the county requested information from your organization that it has not received?
No.
So we are here today because the county has received everything the county asked for from your organization.
100%.
So you do not know why we're here today.
It's an argumentative question. You can answer if you understand it, Tom.
Why are we here today?
Calls for speculation.
Because I was subpoenaed.
Okay, those are my questions.
Mr. Ortner, to make sure I understand correctly what I've heard today, the only financial records OMG maintained were electronic in QuickBooks, and you decided to terminate this service. Is that correct?
You're asking if I terminated the electronic service? Or
yes. Did you terminate the subscription to QuickBooks Online, causing the destruction of the electronic records?
Yes.
And before doing that, you printed a paper copy in order to retain the records. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then at some point, you decided to destroy that remaining copy of the records, correct?
After we had met the contractual obligations, yes.
And did you check with the county to see if the county needed those records prior to the destruction?
No.
And who disposed of the records? How were those? How was that final paper copy destroyed?
Two-part. Person who did that was me, and I took it to a shredding company.
Okay, and then my last question. I think I heard earlier you were the managing member of the Ortner Management Group LLC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as the managing member, you did perform work, special projects or routine projects related to needs of the county. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And but you received zero compensation for that as an employee. You simply received a K-1 distribution, the profit of your share of the profit of the company. Is that correct?
I think I described it differently earlier, that there was a guaranteed income and distribution.
Did you get a W-2?
I did not.
Did you get a 1099?
I believe everything was wrapped into a K-1.
Yeah, so the K-1 would be the profit of the entity, your share of the profit. But what about pay commensurate with industry standards for the work provided?
I don't recall the answer to that.
And did other members of the LLC perform work and receive K-1 as well, as you described for yourself?
Yes.
Did they also receive a W-2 or a 1099?
You know, just as I said a moment ago, I don't know if I don't know for me, I don't know for them.
And if the IRS were to have questions about this method of accounting and distribution of wages for work performed, would you be able to provide any records other than what you've described today? Do you have records to back up your personal income taxes that would shed light on OMG?
Are you talking about me personally or
Yes.
others?
Yes, you personally. I understand you received profit for work performed, but you didn't receive wages. In other words, what I see is it looks like receiving zero wages was a way to avoid payroll taxes and simply get paid through a larger distribution from the LLC. Is that correct?
That is
Objection. It's argumentative. Go ahead, Tom.
Why? Let me rephrase it. Why did you receive zero pay for work performed?
I never said that that's what.
And it misstates his testimony.
What did you receive a salary and a W-2 for the work you performed?
I did not.
Well, how did you receive pay?
It was called guaranteed income.
Were there payroll taxes on that form of compensation?
I don't know the answer to that because I'm not a tax expert.
Who determined, who within OMG decided how to compensate staff for work performed?
I did.
Did you have a tax expert assist you?
Yes.
Who is that?
Melissa Lance.
I have no further questions. Any other supervisors? Do we have public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, I think we're done with this item, and that's the last item of the day. We're adjourned.
Thank you all.
Hi, this is the court reporter. I just have one clarifying question. Hello?